Good evening. Welcome, everybody.
Good
Welcome.
evening.
Good evening. How good? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good tonight.
Welcome to another Friday Night Live event of Hear Me Now Ministries, where we are dedicated to building up the next generation of preachers. That is our goal with this ministry, with our Friday Night Live in particular, as we share in sermon writing, Bible study, all kinds of topics that are relevant to pastoring and pastoral leadership. Thanks, Tina.
Thanks,
Good
Tina.
evening.
Hi, Tina.
Nolette is
Nolette.
here. Good evening, Nolette.
Hey.
Good to see you tonight.
Good evening,
Hi,
Courtney.
Courtney. Welcome to you. We've got some early birds coming on tonight.
Mhm.
Welcome to you, each one and all. Come up and tell us where you're from. If you come on, we'd like to say hi to you. So we're here tonight with a very special program. We're not doing a sermon tonight. Take a break sometimes from sermons in order to do some of these other things. You know, we've had interviews, we've had panels before on different topics. And tonight is another panel. Here's Richard.
Hey,
One of our regulars.
Richard.
Richard, good to see you tonight. No, you should not. No, you should not be in the comments tonight.
John. Why can't
See,
he? I mean, if he can do both things
no, you don't
and
need to do
multitask,
both. You don't need to do both.
I think it's okay.
Live is enough.
do
Live
what
is
you do
enough.
what you do, John. You're 44. I didn't mean to tell everybody how old you
No,
were.
this is not. Paul, yeah, Paul can comment. He's not coming up on the screen.
Paul can.
There's
Hey,
Mary.
Mary.
Hi, Mary. AUC contingent is here.
Happy
Is
Sabbath,
Erica?
Erica.
Erica in Delaware.
Yes.
Happy Sabbath to you. Thanks for being here.
Yes.
Oh, that's in California.
Mhm.
Now, last week we had some folks. Hi, Courtney. We had some
Mhm.
folks from overseas last week. I wonder if there's anybody here tonight.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Julia. It's Julia again. Anybody here tonight from overseas who is tuning in? If you are, just say hi and tell us where you're from.
Mhm.
We don't have that all the time, but last week we had somebody from
Africa.
Kenya, right?
Can you-
Yeah, we had somebody from Kenya last week.
Mhm.
So if you're here tonight, say hi.
Sabbath, Gwen.
Hi, Gwen. How are you?
Happy
Welcome
Sabbath.
to you all. Happy Sabbath.
Mhm.
Thanks for being here.
California is overseas. You have to cross the water to get there, right?
No, you do not. Unless you come from Australia. Hey, Ralph.
Happy Sabbath,
Hey,
Ralph.
Good to see you. I take it Rhodes is nearby.
Mhm.
Signed, what do you say? 49 years of marriage, they told us
Yes.
last time.
Mhm.
Let us know when you have your 50th.
Mhm.
We'll do a shout out for you on the show.
Mhm.
Give you a virtual cake or something for your anniversary. We start celebrating anniversaries on here. You know that?
Mhm.
Maybe once a year.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, maybe once a year have an anniversary show and do a
Mhm.
text or a sermon having to do with marriage, something like that. Anyway,
Mhm.
just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Okay, tonight, very special. Tonight, we're going to spend some time talking with the children of pastors, children who grew up in pastors' homes, PKs, they're called, pastors' kids, and share their experiences of what it was like to grow up in a minister's home, the things that they encountered, how it affected them, the things that they learned from it that they can share with you as a pastor or even as any kind of spiritual leader. And so that you can understand better how your family might be affected. And as members, you can understand how the family of your pastor is being affected
Mhm.
as they're trying to do this double thing of, raising children in this glass bowl of the pastorate where your whole life is always on display.
Mhm.
And what that's like for young people, children, teenagers going up. We're going to ask our guests about that. Hi, Tracy. Happy
Hello,
Sabbath to you.
Tracy.
We're going to ask that.
Sherry, how you doing?
Now we can get started. Here's Sherry.
Massachusetts.
Oh, I didn't realize you're on what city is it? Tracy, she's on the border of New Hampshire.
No, that's
So,
Sherry.
I mean, Sherry. So she's
Mhm.
not in. Must not be in South Lancaster anymore. I don't know what city that
Happy
is.
Sabbath.
Hi, Tanya.
Okay. From
Orchard
OPC.
Park.
We
Okay.
miss you too.
Yeah, Tanya, our membership is still there
Mhm.
officially. Hi, Rose.
Hey, Rose.
We worked there at church in Chattanooga for a while.
Ruth and Bernard,
Ruth and
how are
Bernard
you
are
all
here. I
doing?
like that wedding picture. It's nice.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, where was I? I forgot.
I don't even know. You're doing
So
a
we
lot
got these couples
of
tonight.
extra.
We're going to talk about being, hey, Mary,
Hi,
we
Maria.
talk about being pastor's kids. So you can have a better understanding.
Ashley since 2004.
Oh,
Ashby.
Ashby,
Since
we've been gone
2004.
a long time.
Okay.
We left in a
Mhm.
year. We've been
I
gone
don't
a long
even
time.
know.
Ashby, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some pictures of your place on Facebook. I
Mhm.
couldn't pick it. I couldn't tell where it was from the pictures, but now I know it's Ashby. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So we have these adults coming up who grew up in pastors' homes. And so part of it is for you to understand as believers what the experience of your pastors and your pastor's family is like as they try to lead your church and the kind of support that you can give.
Mhm.
And then the wisdom you might need as a pastor
Mhm.
to raise your family in the church in ways that are nurturing for them
Mhm.
and for your family and for the church as well.
Mhm.
That's our goal. So, hey, Griselda.
Happy Sabbath, Pastor Joe. Okay.
Okay. What's the Winnipeg? Is the
Mhm.
camp there or something in
Mhm.
Winnipeg? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
we have
Mhm.
4 PKs here. We have
Mhm.
3. We have 2 individuals and 1 couple, all pastors' kids. We'll introduce them in just a minute. Get ready to meet them right after this brief little interlude here. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Let's bring them on up. We have our guest here tonight, Heather Cruz. Hi, Heather.
Heather.
Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, Heather.
John and April are here. Hi, John and April. Let's hear both your voices.
Hi,
Hi
guys.
guys.
And there is
Hey.
Sheldon Kennedy. Hi, Sheldon.
Hey, family. How's it going?
Hi, Sheldon.
Thanks for being here, all,
Hey.
taking the time out to share with us your experience. It's going to be a blessing. Let me start by asking you each to introduce yourself. That is to say, introduce your birth family as well as your current family. Tell us, the family you grew up in, and tell us the family that you have now and what you do. And I'm going to start with Heather. We'll go alphabetically by last name. Start with
All
Heather.
right. I can introduce you to my parents who raised me, David and Lynn Ripley. I call him Dr. Dad.
Okay.
And her pastor mom. There's the picture. I grew up just feeling like we lived at the church and involved in ministry, and you're all nodding because you've done that too. I have an older sister and a younger brother, and I just texted my sister and said if she had any stories she wanted me to tell, she could text them to me. And she said, where do I start?
Great.
Yeah, there's
So,
a
Heather,
lot.
both your parents are clergy, though, right?
Correct. Yes, they're now retired, but both are clergy. Yes.
Wow.
And so, were they ever pastoring at the same time or in the same church, anything like that? That was part of it.
Yes.
Okay.
They were pastoring at the same time several times. They were also in the division level work, both as ministerial directors at the same
Oh,
time. So they've
okay.
often had that. They've all along had a parallel path in ministry.
Mhm. Have they ever pastored in separate places?
If you consider where he was a pastor and she was departmental at the conference, then they are in
Okay.
separate places. But
Okay.
they would work together otherwise.
Okay. Always working together, though.
Always working together. They're a very close couple.
Raising two daughters. What about you currently, Heather?
I pastored for over 20 years and then I transitioned to the office. I am currently an associate director of the Potomac Conference for Pastoral Ministries,
Okay.
as well as an associate director in the Ministerial Association for the North American Division.
Oh,
So I like to stay busy too.
That's it.
yeah, I didn't even know it was possible. So you work for NAD and local conference at the same time?
They've made an arrangement so I can do that. Yes.
Wow.
Sounds like 2 full-time jobs.
It does.
Yes. It's so much fun.
I don't know how you do it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for introducing yourself. Let's go to Sheldon.
Oh, I'm Sheldon Kennedy. I'm the last born of DK and June Kennedy. What can I say?
How many?
My father.
Last born, how many?
There's 3 of us. There's Robert Kennedy III, there's Leighton Kennedy, and me. Their favorite son, that is undisputed. Sheldon Kennedy. And my dad is a pastor for over 54 years.
Is he still pastoring now, Sheldon?
Man, he ain't quitting. Yeah, no, and my mom was a teacher. She's retired. So that was a great experience. Our journey took us from country to country, which is real cool. And now I've been married for 16 years.
Mhm.
and I have two wonderful boys. I ran. I am not a minister. That probably saved many souls, more than me being a minister. So hallelujah.
Did you think about it at some point?
You know what? Not in the go to Oakwood or go to Andrew's perspective. I always thought that my ministry would be something that is outside of the current structure of
Okay.
pastoring. And I think I am serving some of it. There's so much more to me. I am serving part of it right now, but there is a whole other division of Sheldon that God is unlocking little by little,
Okay.
so that I can do that.
Okay, we want to hear about your travels too when we come back to you, because moving is part of it. Sherry thinks she knows you. Oh,
Of
she
course
does.
I do.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's the
She's
truth.
at AUC. That's true. That's
of
true.
course, of course.
Okay, John and April, you guys take your turn. Now you got two pastors' families here. You're both from pastor families. I don't know what order they take you in, but
You said alphabetical, so it's got to be April 1st.
okay,
It's
we got to be first.
So I'm April. I was like Nixon, Mendenhall. Didn't know what you want to say. April Mendenhall Nixon.
Mhm.
I am the youngest of Bernard and Ruth Mendenhall,
Hey, yes.
and my father.
So how many? April?
Oh, it's two of us. My older sister, Kimberly. Yes, it's just me and her.
Okay.
And my father pastored. He didn't really pastor that long before he went into the conference as like superintendent.
Yeah, education.
And education.
Andrew Carpenter.
Oh, hey.
What's up, man?
Hey,
That's
dear.
Andrew.
He was my student.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
And then he went into youth director and then secretary and president. And he was the best president, by the way.
Right.
Amen.
And I'm not just saying that. He really was. Anyway, I miss him being the president. But anyway, and my mother, she was a teacher for, 43 years, I believe.
Yeah, I thought it was 45, but anyway.
No,
it was a long time.
It was like 43.
Okay.
But anyway, they are wonderful parents and enjoying their retirement. So
Good for them. God bless them. And of course, you're in a current family. Maybe I can ask John to talk about that when he introduces himself.
I was going to leave that to you.
Oh, okay. Our current family. Okay. So I'm John Nixon II. I actually don't know my birth parents, but I was adopted. I was adopted by this lovely couple, John and Nixon. And I'm the oldest of three. So there's Paul and then Claire. My father just retired from ministry in December. My mom just retired from teaching, like in June.
Yep.
And they do this podcast now. So I don't know anything else about them. But anyway. I'm trying to remember how long Dad passed. I can't remember, Dad.
I need to know how long my dad passed.
Yeah, I should know that off the top of my head.
Mom and Daddy text me and tell me how long.
So Dad, I feel like pastored for 45 years, but I know when he started. It was 1976,
Right.
and so it was too before I was born. And I'm 44 now.
Well, let's not
And you just retired.
say this real quick. I pastored 34. I taught for 6. I was in the conference office for 5. So I pastored 34 years.
Okay, all right. Well, either way, you're never until you leave the denomination, you're still pastoring. So
I'm retired.
45 years.
Listen, pastoring still.
Exactly. So we have two children, John the third, who is 17, and Julia, who is 15. They're both high schoolers at Tacoma Academy. I'm married to April, and we've been married for almost 22 years.
What do you do for a living, John?
I'm a pastor as well. Yeah, so I pastor. I've been pastoring for 22 years. Right? Yeah.
And April's a teacher. So you both follow your parents.
And April's a teacher, right? So we basically just we were boring. We did exactly what our parents did.
Okay.
By accident.
Right.
Boring.
Wasn't on purpose.
That says a lot about the example your parents had for you.
Lisa's saying that we would AUC when her daughters were students.
Okay.
There. Okay.
No, SAU, Southern.
Oh, Southern.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting,
Yeah,
I'm thinking
that's
of,
Southern. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Courtney,
yeah,
17.
17
years
timing.
old, John.
Right.
here's what I want to ask you to talk about next for just a few minutes. Talk about your travels as pastor's kids. When I say travels, I mean movement, living different places. I don't know how often you did that, and how it affected you as you were growing up. Just briefly talk about that a few minutes. I don't know. Some of us move more than others, but what was your experience like, Heather, when it comes to that?
When it comes to travels, we moved a lot. I remember a lot of boxes, a lot of packing tape. When Tetris came out, I was pretty good at it. I think it was all that experience.
Tetris.
Same with me, by the way.
Mm.
We could challenge each other to a game and find out how
Yeah,
our PK
exactly.
skills measure up in
Right.
real life.
Right.
We moved a lot. I remember the packing, the unpacking. I also remember that my family was very close. So every time I moved, I felt like I took my friends with me.
Mm.
Having an older sister and a younger brother. I mean, we were siblings, we fought, but nobody could pick on my brother except for me. And it did make me have a harder time creating really deep relationships with anybody outside of my family.
Mm.
Because I had a sense that at some point I would leave them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask me who in my life have I known the longest, you're going to come up with the names of my family because they were the ones who always went along with me.
Right.
And I still remember some good friends, but I do know that my primary unit of support throughout my whole life has been my family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tell me, in your movement, what do you remember about how it affected maybe your education at all? All the moving you were doing.
I don't remember it affecting my education. It was kind of like another school, another adventure. Let's take it on. I had times where I struggled in school and my dad would sit down at the dining room table and say, Heather, if you'd move a little slower, you could do this math thing really well. I wanted to get through it and wanted to get done.
Right.
I was able to just dig in wherever we were at. So education wise, because of the support from my family on that side, it didn't negatively impact it. I think it did give me a yearning for variety.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was always change. So that was just like, okay, when's the next thing that I get to do? When's
Yeah,
that
I
thing?
had a lot from that. Yeah.
Which also appeals to me now because I love pastoring because I have a set structure and I love what I do now because I have a pattern for over a month, but I never know what God's going to do next during the day.
Right.
And it's this constant, okay, where's the next surprise that God is bringing on? So
Right.
it had primed me for that. And I still look each day with those eyes saying, well, hey, what's going to happen today?
Mhm.
Is your experience similar to that, Sheldon, or would you say it was any different in terms of now, you talk about different countries in your movement?
Yeah, but you know, I realized. Thank you so much for that, Heather, because I realized that I'm not crazy, right? Because you know, sometimes you feel like you're out on an island because you don't have attachments, right? You know, I realize now that, well, I realized years ago that it affects me now, right? So by the time I was 20 years old, I think I calculated I had moved probably 11 or 12 times,
Wow.
right? So for us, my first move, I don't remember, right? Because we left Jamaica to come to New York, right? So I was born in Jamaica, then we moved to New York. No, I lied. I just lied to you. I moved from I
you
moved
made a
from
mistake.
Jamaica. Yeah, I did. Right. I moved from Jamaica to Canada for 1 year, to Montreal for 1 year, and then we moved to New York,
Okay.
and then we moved to Canada,
Mm.
to Toronto, to the Toronto area,
Mhm.
and then we moved to Massachusetts,
Mhm.
right? But in those moves, you know, you're moving from city, you know, you're moving from city to city, you know, different locales in that, you know, I think a lot of who I am happened in New York and in Massachusetts. Thank God I ran into this family. I don't remember their name, man.
Another presidential last
It's a president thing, Kennedy and Nixon.
Yeah. Some of the presidential family, right? But you know, Heather, you're talking about close friends. Obviously, my two brothers are my brothers, but my extended brotherhood happened when I hit Massachusetts with my other two. You know, I have two other brothers by the name of John and Paul, and then I have extended brothers outside of that, right? But it's crazy. You know, you bounce from place to place, and you place from place to place to place, but you really don't stick because you're like, we're moving.
We're going next. What about schooling, Sheldon? Have you any idea of how it moved with your education coming in? Or negative, positive?
Yes. Was it positive? So luckily that my mom was a teacher. If my mom wasn't a teacher, I probably wouldn't have been very good. My personality is not one that was conducive to teachers allowing me to learn. It was tough. It was tough for me. I did well in school, but it was difficult for me because, you know, the hardest transition honestly was the last time we went to Canada, right? So it was a school of 400 kids. Out of the entire school, there were 2 Black kids. Right now, yeah, that was the toughest one for me because, you know, it wasn't a Christian school, and you know, I got called a whole lot of names, right? But you're calling this is a kid that's just leaving New York. His mental status is not too good, so I was angry a lot when we lived in Canada because of that. But you know, again, by the grace of God and a mother who wanted me to learn, you know, that was the best. And my dad's a teacher as well. You know, he took the same path that you did, Pastor Dixon.
Yeah,
You know,
I took a class from him actually when I was doing my doctorate. Let me ask you a question. I don't want to take too much time. When you were having this experience in Canada in anger, did your parents know at the time that you were dealing with that kind of anger? At the time, did they know?
probably not. Probably yes and no. My mom, my dad was in the union at that time, so he was doing a lot more traveling. My mom, on the other hand, probably did know, but what the saving grace is that they put me into music. You know, I was always doing stuff, so it kind of kept me distracted. But I was still an angry kid. I was still angry because I didn't want to leave New York. I didn't, you know what I mean? I'm a New Yorker, right? You know, so I didn't want to leave. And then you throw me into that. Nah, that was not to my liking.
Johnny, well, tell us about your experience. The same thing, same question.
I didn't have the same experience that these 3 had. I moved to Atlanta. I guess I was 4.
I thought you were younger than that. I
I
thought you were
think
2.
I was 2 when we moved to Georgia,
To Athens?
to Savannah or something like
Oh,
that.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But anyway, I was very young moving to Atlanta. So I stayed there my whole life. In my, you know,
Because the conference office is in Atlanta, and her dad got into the conference office there. That's why they moved there. And
Exactly.
he never left the conference
so
again.
my whole, you know, upbringing, that part of my life was in Atlanta.
In the
So
same house.
stayed in the same. Well, we moved to another house just to, you know, move to another house.
You know,
It wasn't,
boxes and
it
all.
wasn't because we had to. I don't even remember packing, honestly. I was just because we've been packing up, and so I was thinking like I don't remember actually doing this when we moved from, and we literally moved like what 2 miles down the street.
Right. Wouldn't be that far. Right.
So, you know, I don't, you know, and I was a 8th grader when we moved. So we, you know, the same house basically, and we were excited to move. So it wasn't like, you know, we weren't leaving our friends. I stayed at the same school the entire time
Until you went
You
to
were-
until I went to Pine
Yeah.
Forge my junior year. Pine Forge was the first school that
That's
I went to.
Yeah.
So very different experience. I'm not sure, because of my personality, I'm an introvert. I'm not sure how I would do moving as a kid from place to place, because what we did was we did travel with my dad a lot to churches on Sabbath. And I would just be like, you know, that was so hard for me because it was like you have to go in, and sometimes we had to go to Sabbath school with people we didn't know.
Right.
So I don't know how I would have done going from school to school to school with, you know, because just me going to Andrews with John was hard for me. That was very difficult. So I'm not sure how I would. Maybe because I, you know, I
That's your
didn't
first
have
time
that
in
experience.
Atlanta. Well, you left Atlanta when you got married, but up until then, you just lived in that one town. That was it, your whole life. That's what most people probably do. You know, we're accustomed to all that moving. Most people
Right.
probably have an experience more
Right.
like April's experience.
Mhm.
Right.
The same conference, the churches in the same areas.
Well, most of
I
my
moved the church,
past-
but they don't have to move.
most
know
of my friends that were PKs were moving. You know, they were always moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I am the oddball with pastors' kids, and whenever they're talking to us, they're like, "Oh, you guys moved a lot as kids," and I would just, you know, I'll just be like, "Yeah," you know, because
It's just assume
it's just,
that.
you know, they just assume that, yeah. But I didn't
Well,
experience.
saying your parents seem to have purposely planned not only for them but for their children.
Yeah, the way this thing worked out.
The way they worked it out.
John, tell us
Well,
your
I
favorite.
know that my father did pray a prayer asking the Lord to keep his family in one location so that he could raise his children. And the Lord answered that prayer, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
John, then I want to get some. There are a lot of comments. I want to get some on this. But let me hear from you first.
our experience was similar to Sheldon's. We moved a lot, never out of the country, but on different coasts. So I was born in New York, and then we moved to Massachusetts, then back to New York, then to California, then to DC, then to Huntsville. And of course, I became a pastor, and then we were in Georgia, and then went to seminary at Andrews, and then South Carolina, and then North Carolina, and now we're here in Maryland. So we moved a whole bunch. I forgot. You're right. North Carolina, then Georgia again, then Maryland. You're right. I missed one in there. So it's been a lot. There were a lot of different schools. We counted them at one point. It was like 7 schools. I can't remember now, but something like that. Of course, all those different cities and everything. I personally feel like it helped me from a relational standpoint, that I know how to interact with any kind of person, because in California, the 2 minorities at our school were black and white. There were 8 black kids, there were 8 white kids. The rest of the kids were either Hispanic or Asian. When we moved back to Massachusetts and my father pastored at AUC, that was a mostly white environment. It was just a few of us that were black, or I should say of color, in that environment. And then we've also been in situations where it was mostly black. So I feel that has helped me to be able to know how to relate to people without feeling uncomfortable, just because I grew up with all different kinds of people. It's also why I don't have a distinct accent. People usually don't know where I'm from because I've lived so many places. So from that perspective, I thought it was a positive. Same like Heather, our family was very close. So we always felt like when we went somewhere, we were taking the closest people to us. So it was always nice. And I think we got closer and closer with every move, because we were always moving to a place we didn't know anybody. And then, like Sheldon said, once we got to high school, that's where I met the friends that I'm still friends with now. I don't know how that happened, but for some reason, every other place that we lived, we didn't have any real lasting friendships where it was like super close. I think there may have been a shared trauma in our high school years. That might have been what it was, because we were a small group of minority guys that hung together, and we did have several instances of racism, which we won't get into tonight. If you watch our other podcast, what's it called? The Boymanship Podcast, we talk about it a lot on that. But anyway, I think that's what made us bond. And so the friends I made in high school, we're still like brothers to this day. And that was 20 something years ago. Anyway.
Some of those racial incidents were actually in the community, not in the church. That's a whole nother podcast maybe. But let's get some comments up. I see a lot of comments going up, and I think Heather's maybe sister's got some comments in there. Pull some up and see what she's saying.
That's my sister. Yes.
Oh, she says it's an opposite for her, Heather. She said, I wanted to settle down and get comfy at one place, and I have. That
And
said,
she has.
I always felt supported by my family growing up.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, she settled down. She has home. She's been in the same place. That's where she and her husband are raising their son. Um,
Mhm.
and they've kept him in the same school going along. So she's responded in a different way. Instead of that quest for adventure and what's next, she said, my adventure is in one place.
Mhm.
I think
It's
she
And
very.
it impacts us all differently.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm an introvert too, but I learned to push out of my comfort zone and be outgoing, developing good skills for interviews, work, and other roles that I went on to fill.
Okay.
Mhm.
Nice.
But I think
Then I-
every
then I go
family.
home.
But this is important
go home and
too.
read.
Yes, right there. Then I go home to read and recoup. Yes.
Yeah.
But honey, don't you think that in every family, each one of the children may have a different perspective?
Different,
Like
yeah,
Heather's sister,
I'm sure.
I think if you talk to John or Claire,
Paul.
Paul or Claire, they would
Mhm.
have maybe a different twist, as well as Kim might have a little
Yeah.
different twist.
Eventually.
And also your brothers, Bobby and
Yeah. So
might
you
have a
know,
different experience.
100% their experiences were different. So
Yeah.
for Bobby left Jamaica when he was 7.
Mhm.
So that's different. Bobby's 6 years older than me. So that transition, he would tell me stories like, when he came to the United States, it was a situation of people talking about his accent, right? Because that was the first part of it. But luckily, we went to a Jamaican church in the Bronx, so that freed all that. But in elementary school, that's not necessarily the same, right? So he
Right.
definitely felt it different. And just like your sister Heather, Bob, my older brother, is a introvert extreme,
Uh-huh.
and I don't. Well, I'm not necessarily an introvert. I guess I'm an ambivert,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
so it didn't affect me in the same way that it affected him. But yeah, the experience is definitely different.
And I think the experience is different, but I don't think it's just divided along introvert or extrovert. Because if I take the test, I'm an introvert. John, do you believe it?
I do not.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. But it's where do we get energy at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, where I'm 100% with my sisters when she says, and then I go home and read a book and recoup at
You do
home.
the same
Right.
thing.
Right.
Because love people, love being out. Yeah, what's the next adventure? And I could go on more about that, but that's where we get the energy. So I think we're sharing some experience and some principles that come out of it, but it really comes down to, okay, if we're trying to apply these to our pastor's kids, I have 2 kids, I have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. I need to sit down and talk with them because they each have a different experience.
Mhm.
And they think it's hilarious when I share pastored kids stories. But then they'll start talking. And so I appreciate this conversation that you're holding because I think it'll spark some other conversations. So this impacted this person or me in this way. So how about you? And maybe even telling some of the embarrassing stories too. Not
Paul,
here with my kids.
You had a big comment up by Tim that you took down. Tim's comments are always like 2-3 paragraphs long.
Honey.
Let's take the time to read this one,
John's
baby. Go ahead, baby.
It is interesting to hear this. One of the turning points in my ministry was becoming a chaplain on the university campus. Before this time, for the first 15 years, from 83 to 98, we moved 13 times. Wow. East Coast to West Coast, back to the East Coast. But then when we moved to Andrews University in the summer of 1998 and remained there for the next 16 years for Michael and Camille's entire education.
Mhm.
So they actually grew up in a very stable environment. The Andrews move came from nowhere totally.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. So that's interesting. So the kids had a different experience than they had because
Mhm.
they were more stable. That's interesting.
Stable in terms of moving around and bouncing back and forth. Not every kid can handle that.
So I would actually say that looking back on my childhood, maybe it's because of how I'm wired, but I would have been bored. I would have been bored if we stayed in the same place my entire life. I can't imagine doing it differently than what we did. I loved it.
If you don't know anything
I
else,
would be bored stiff.
about the 5th year, they would say, "Okay, when are we moving?"
When are we moving?
You know?
Yeah.
Yep.
don't know if Claire was saying that. I know
I
the
do it
boy,
till this day,
but yeah,
till this very day.
kicking and screaming most of the time that we had to move.
Let me show you guys something, and I want your reaction to it. Paul, put up on the screen for us. Paul is restless now. If you-
Really? Wow.
I got a text I want you to look at, and I want to get your reaction to it from Titus. Read this, man.
An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient.
The Message paraphrase puts it this. They put it in the form of a question.
Are his children believers? Do they respect him and stay out of trouble?
So here's my question. Does the church have a right to expect you to be different from the other kids because you are the kids of the pastor? And the part of the pastor's qualification is that his kids should not be rebellious and they should be believers. Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, I had to jump on this one. All right, so please understand where this is coming from. It took me a while. So while I enjoyed all the moving and everything, and I enjoyed the people, it took me a while to become a Christian again because of that fact right there.
Wow.
I felt like I was always underneath a major microscope, and it was just always, I felt like it was unfair. Like there were some kids who, who's, the parents would be chastising us, but your kid is right beside me doing the same thing. Right? So don't reach over your kid and tap me in church. Tap your child.
Reach over.
Don't, you know what I mean? Don't. But yeah, it really took me a while to get to this point. I had to find my own journey in the process, and I appreciate my parents for always sticking up for us. Right? One simple story. I remember this. It was early in the 80s, and Leighton was one of the first kids in our church to get a flat top.
Oh,
Somebody came. Yeah, you know, really
Yeah,
tight
like
tape on
kid
the
and
side,
play.
no fade. So, a person came up to him and told him that this was I can't use the word that they told him that it was, because it was a real derogatory term, but they were saying that it was unchristlike. The haircut was unchristlike. The haircut was unchristlike.
Wow.
Like legit. I'm thinking to myself, really? Like, you're telling a kid that couldn't have been more than 11 years old. Now, here goes the thing. My father's the one that cut the hair.
For the expectations or the feelings about the pastor to bleed over on the kids. And I guess my heart starts bleeding a little bit as you tell that story, because there was a time in my father's ministry that there was a strong contingent in the church that was disagreeing with him theologically. Can I say it that way?
Yes.
And that started bleeding over on me and my brother, who were in the one-room school. And I remember being the anger again, Sheldon. I was so angry that they were picking on my brother because their parents were upset with my dad.
Wow.
And that's an unfair expectation of a child. But it also tells us, how do we speak of our pastors and those we disagree with? Because those kids had heard their parents and how they had expressed. So there's that very real responsibility for, how do we teach our kids to disagree with others? How do we treat those? Even though they felt that their theological belief was salvational, which meant they had to go to the mat on it.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty rough season in his ministry.
Wow.
John Abel, before you answer, let me put this up, because this is related. I'll put this down, Paul. Then I want to hear your answer to the same question. Barnard did it's kind of old. It's 2013. Barnard did a study of pastors with children ages 15 and older, and in the study, these are some of the results that came up.
40% went
Their
through.
children went through.
Percent of the children went through a period when they significantly doubted their faith.
Mm.
3% are no longer actively involved.
That's a third.
Mhm.
A third of pastors don't actively involved in the church. Right?
And 7% no longer consider him or herself to be a Christian.
Wow.
There's one more 7%, Paul. Is that it?
That's
Okay.
it.
There's another page. Go to the next slide.
Mhm.
This is all. Now, this is interesting because those are the results. Here, the pastors telling the reasons they think their kids are having these struggles.
Mhm.
Same circle. Go ahead, but
Okay, 28% say that they have unrealistic expectations others put on them.
Mhm.
18% say that exposure to the negative aspects of the church,
Mhm.
and 17% say the pastor is too busy for
Lord have
them.
mercy on us.
Wow.
Yeah, have mercy. Go ahead,
14% say that their faith is not
Mhm.
modeled consistently at home,
but-
Mhm.
and 9% say worldly influences or peers,
Wow.
and 7% say that self-discovery and free
Free will.
will
Mhm.
resulting in rebellion.
Mm.
7% failure to make their faith their own.
Now look at that
Wow.
screen for a
Yeah.
moment. I want you to respond, John Abel, but look at that screen for a moment and notice the home part. 70% the pastor, 14% the home.
Mhm.
That's a big, put those two together. You got a big chunk of the struggle of the pastor's kid has to do with the faith in the home.
Well, you could probably add the 7% failure to make the faith their own kind of too, because maybe there's something about their home life that is making it difficult
Yeah.
for you to make your, so it's a bigger percentage, I would say, that has to do with that.
But 28% expectations others put on them. Now, Sheldon mentioned how his parents shielded him from that. I don't know if all pastors do, but there's a big piece of it right there. John Abel, what do you say in response?
Yeah, for me, I think my parents really, I think they shielded us, me and my sister, from the things that people said and did. Because, years later, once we got into the ministry and we were in the same conference, I found out some things and I'm like, what? Like, I didn't even know that was going on. But I know I did deal with things like I couldn't understand why certain people treated me a certain way. I just didn't understand because my parents shielded me from the things that were going on. So I would, why is this adult treating me this way? I didn't do anything to them. And, find out years later the story behind it.
You actually didn't find out until we got married and
Until we got
she was an
married and
adult.
I was,
And then she said, "Oh, that's why they were treating me like that."
treating me like that years ago.
Mhm.
And so a lot for me, it was I felt my parents really supported their children, and would say, this is how we do things. You don't worry about that, that kind of thing. And I appreciate them for that because it made me not hate the church, hate the people. When John said it, when he said he wanted to be a theology major, he thought I was going to be like, okay, we're done.
That's gonna work out.
But I didn't have a negative experience as a pastor's kid from, as far as my family is concerned. I didn't really either with the people, I think I was just used to people saying stuff like, I'm gonna tell your daddy. And I would be like, go ahead. I would always be like, my dad is not even like that. People would think my dad was, like strict and, that kind of thing. And he wasn't. So they didn't know that side of him. I mean, he would say, we would make jokes and dad'd be like, did you beat him up? Did you, did you win? Making jokes, But anyway, I'm just saying he was a joke or whatever. He was a good parent, but I'm saying, I think they thought threatening to tell my father would make me act right. But I appreciated my parents when I would let them know what happened. They supported me and how I felt about it.
And you felt like the threat that they were making was
Wasn't
you're
even-
a pastor's kid threat.
Always.
Like, I'm gonna tell your dad, like, oh, I'm gonna tell the pastor on you,
always,
kind of thing.
Always.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So similarly, I felt like we had a good experience growing up as pastors' kids, or at least I did. So I didn't have negative feelings around that. And I felt like because my parents didn't say, these are the things that you have to do in order to make sure the members don't talk about you. These are things you have to do to make sure they're happy. We didn't
Yeah,
have that.
right.
So if some lady came to me at church and said whatever she said, I didn't like it, but I knew my parents didn't feel that way too. And so it was okay. I knew when I came home, I had
Right.
the support of my parents.
Exactly.
And so that wasn't a problem. And I feel like that's probably why all of us stayed in the church, and all three of us worked for the church in
Mhm.
some kind of way.
Yeah.
Even though I'm the only one that became a pastor, all of us are very actively involved in church. And, I think that had a lot to do with it. So the one piece I would say, though, is early in life, when I was little, I do remember feeling this thing around my dad being too busy, and I remember when it changed, because I had this feeling, but I didn't know what it was, and it wasn't until it changed that I realized, oh, okay, so this is what it's like when we can actually do stuff as a family where all of us can go together. And that was when we moved to California. Before then, and I was 9. So I was 9 years old when we moved to California. And I remember distinctly things changing dramatically, where just a few years before, we had gone on some family trip and Dad couldn't come because of some conference obligation. And then just a few years later in California, those obligations were gone. And now we'd go on family trips all the time.
Yeah.
And it was great.
That's true.
So I don't know what would have happened. I'm not sure what would have happened differently had that not changed, because that was a positive thing for me. I know I needed that interaction, and I wanted us to feel like we were all together, and that was a positive thing to happen. So anyway, I don't know what else I'm gonna say.
I've seen a lot of comments. Try and get some before we run out of time. We don't have time maybe to respond to them all, but let's just read a few, and then I'll give all of you a last chance to say something. Let's just read some of them.
This is too short, but anyway.
Good.
The first responsibility of parents is their children. Could it be too many pastors are trying to please conference leaders and congregants? Could the way too many moves be the pastor's desire to move up the ladder? Are we including in our training of pastoral leaders how to parent?
Wow.
Mm.
Good question.
See another one. Let's see some more. We're not going to take time to respond to all of them.
I love the first thing she said, that the first responsibility of parents is their children, not the church.
Lisa had a good experience growing up, supportive parents. What else, Paul?
Eli and Samuel both had very sinful children.
That's true. That's a good point.
They did.
That's true. There's some larger comments. Okay, here's another
Donovan
pastor.
says, our daughters don't want to move. I'm at the age where that has become a primary goal for us. I will be praying the mending hall prayer.
Paul, you want to share before we come back? Okay.
Okay. Deja was a great private school for me, inspiring new things. Okay. And April Nixon was an awesome teacher to me, teaching me how to do acting and learning about God at John's old church.
Yeah, D'Angelo.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
The Harrises traveled most weekends throughout upstate New York, Northeastern Conference, to visit 13 churches assigned to Dad at the 13 churches. Wow, assigned to Dad at the conference level in literature evangelism. Okay, our childhood friends were other PKs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the PK connection is real.
Yes, right.
It is.
Real.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's Paul saying?
Also, I'd like to hear another story from Heather.
Heather.
I agree.
I'd be happy to tell you another story, because a story actually came up, John, as you were talking about trying to figure out what kept you in the church. Because my husband Eric and I were having this conversation, and we really traced it down to each just a very short period in our lives that we really feel was the Velcro that has us still connected and actively supporting the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And where it all started for me is that a family meeting where I went to my parents and I said, I'm not going to Sabbath school anymore.
Wow.
And what had happened is the junior Sabbath school teacher had said, if you study your lesson every day, this will be your reward. Go to a little local tourist attraction. And it was enough motivation for me that I, who had never done it before, studied my Sabbath school lesson every day for the quarter. and then the reward was never given.
Oh
Whoa.
my goodness.
So I was not going back. I was not
I'm
stepping foot into that Sabbath school anymore. Trust was broken. I was done.
Wow.
So I went to my parents, and as you heard, both my parents are pastors.
Right.
Father served as a president before he retired. Mother departmental, pastored many churches. They are deep into this church, and they looked at me, and I think it was a God thing, because they said, you have two choices, Heather. You either get a job serving or you go to Sabbath school. And so I started teaching in a different Sabbath school.
Wow.
So
What age?
I had what age? I was a junior.
Okay.
Okay.
So I had to be 4th, 5th grade.
Wow.
Wow.
And I was blessed by parents who listened and gave me a choice.
Mhm.
And when I travel around and visit churches and my children don't want to go into the Sabbath school, they get the same two choices. And so we have my children becoming greeters or finding another job at a church they've never been to before,
Wow.
because they have a choice.
Mhm.
But I was blessed as a kid by someone being my mentor and letting me teach little kids.
Hmm.
And my parents giving me the space to do that. And my husband talked about a period in his life was only about 7 or 8 months, less than a year, where he had ownership in the church, where what he did made a difference. And we were so surprised how small that space of time had to be, because then my father went to seminary and the picture changed, and I found another place to be involved. But it doesn't take that much when we have ownership of our church to say, I have lifelong ownership of this church.
Mhm.
That when I look at the church and say, okay, we need to grow here, this area is something that I disagree with, or we need to work on, to say, instead of walking away, I'm going to stay and be a part of the change.
Mhm.
That's excellent. That's a great story. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I think we got time maybe for one more. Any more comments you want to put up, Paul, before I want to give Sheldon and John April a chance to say one last thing. I'm watching the time. No. Okay. So let me ask the three of you to give one more comment. By the time you do, time will be up, I'm sure. Maybe a short story you want to tell, whatever you want to share. Remember, people watching and learning from you.
So
Pastors,
I want to say something quickly about how we decided to deliberately raise our children. Because we're both pastors' kids, and because we've both been in the ministry for as long as we have, we wanted to give John and Julia sort of exactly what Heather was talking about. The ability to feel like you have an option. That's a very important thing, because I
Huge.
think most of the time we have to do that. Now there's a bunch of stuff you have to do growing up, right? You do that, and kids understand we have to do this because it's how we do things. But sometimes when it comes to things related to church, we try to allow them to have options, and they're actually both very involved too. They both work in the AV department at our church. They're like the main people. They know how to run everything. It actually happened during COVID, where they went to the next level. They know how to run all the boards. They know how to do everything. If nobody's at church that Sabbath, they could do it. And I don't know. I feel like every so often they'll say, can we have a Sabbath off? As in, like, don't go to church at all and just stay home. And we'll be like, yeah.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
They work on Sabbath.
Every Sabbath is work for them. And
Right.
and that kind of is what it feels like to pastor. You know what I'm saying? Every Sabbath you're working. You're not taking the time off. And it'd be nice every so often to just be like, oh man, I wish I didn't have to go to work today.
Wow.
So,
I think
anyway.
it makes them want to go to church later,
Right.
because they were able to have some time. I don't know. But I was going to say that's what I loved about what my parents did for me, and that was they didn't force me to do. They didn't make me do anything
Mine
when
either.
it came to church. Like they
Right.
didn't make me. They didn't say you have to go to Sabbath school. They didn't say you have to go to Pathfinders.
Mm.
They allowed.
They didn't say you have to preach.
No,
or you have to
You have to
sing.
sing.
Right.
None of that.
Right, me either.
And we wanted to do though. I think
Right.
it's because they didn't force it.
Right.
So we were in Pathfinders. We
Mhm.
were in the choirs and different things like that. And I think I really appreciated that. And I also want to say that there were some times when we had the same conversation in Sabbath school, whether to go to the movies or not, or whether same conversations. And
Mhm.
I appreciated I could come home, and specifically my dad, I was able to talk to him about any of those things, and he would listen. He would never just would never, beat me over the head with the Bible about these things.
Or
you know what I mean?
and he wouldn't respond with the normal Adventist response.
Yes.
If something didn't seem like it made sense, he would say, you know what? That actually doesn't make sense.
And
You're
he would
right.
say, you're right. And I'd be like, wow, really?
Right.
It just made me feel so good that my dad, as a pastor of the same people that are saying this,
Right.
would do that. And whenever my dad was studying for a sermon, I always appreciated that when I knocked on the door, he never turned me away. When I think about that, how, John is studying for his sermons and stuff. And I'm like, man, my dad would do that, but he never, and I would come sit on the bed and talk to him and he'd have his stuff all out. And it would be like, he wasn't studying at all. It would just be about what I'm talking about. I will never forget that as a kid, that he would take that time no matter what. And I appreciated that. So I think that made me, love the church, actually.
Sheldon, last comment, the last few minutes that we have.
Wow.
What's on your mind you want to share?
Wow. This has been like really, really good for me. It's almost like therapy. So one thing I want to say is I think it's so important that pastors help ground their kids in something as they're growing up, and I realized it a couple of years ago. I'm grateful to my parents, and I wish they were here to hear this. They're traveling right now, doing pastoral things. He's actually going to New York. So, but they grounded me with music. That's how they grounded me. Because there were times where I didn't believe. Right, there were times where I knew that I was tailing off, but the music, every week, Sheldon, they bring your trumpet. You're singing. What you singing this Sabbath? Just those little things, right? Just those little things were amazing. Now that because I needed that. I needed that when I went away to school. I went back to school in Jamaica for college for a little bit, and I needed those lessons that I was taught in order to make it. And in order for me to gain a relationship later on, I told you, I did not become a pastor, and that is to the benefit of the church. But, but the way that I do feel like ministry is always in me is whenever when I'm up front, doing praise and worship or anything, I feel like the weight that I don't know if I know pastors must feel it, but there's like a certain feeling of, hey, you're here to do this job of delivering the word. And I just happen to deliver it in song. So I know that is something that I've learned from my parents. And I appreciate them for grounding me in that, because that is what has helped me be where I am with my relationship with God.
Well, that's great. I tell you, this has been fantastic. I can't believe the time is up. But it went by fast. And I want to say thank you to Heather, Sheldon, John, and Nicole for giving us your time tonight. You can't imagine how valuable. And you know what? Our time really is up, man. I want to get some comments. Paul, let's put up like, say, 2 more comments, and we're going to go over time a minute, because there's a lot of comments we didn't get to. There's Jimmy again.
Having a role to fill and being needed makes a big difference. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. That's a great ingredient to me, being involved in my church. Yes.
Oh, here's Janelle. She wants
Yes.
Go ahead.
Janelle is saying being at a different church every week until I went away to PFA didn't give me a grounding experience.
In church.
I never felt ownership in any church. Still too.
Wow.
Wow.
Experience. Yeah.
Man.
Both your parents should mentor the theology students. Okay, Yola.
Okay.
But
Go ahead, Paul. Here one more you're gonna put
yeah.
up.
I'm sad to hear this experience. One of the things I love about our church is how richly multicultural it is. We celebrate that, for example, with an annual international festival.
Yeah, and one of these times we got to talk about that experience we've had in the church.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Church.
Yes, thank you.
The cultural moves John was talking about. We had so many different experiences right in this country that really helped all of us to grow. We were in Southern California, talking about how our family changed during that time. we just had a small church for the first time. That was part of it.
Mhm.
That was it.
Mm.
That was a big part. We had a small church for the first time. But then at a certain point, they put me in charge of a group. And in that area, I had 31 churches of all different cultures and languages and everything.
Mhm.
And that was just a growing experience for us as part of the ministry. Everybody doesn't get that. We were fortunate to get it. And it made us, I think it made us broader, more understanding people. Anyway, hate to close this off. Our time is up. We try to close on time because it's Friday night.
I was trying to get to Sabbath school.
Thinking about Sabbath School of Mom.
That joint virtual.
Exactly. All of our Sabbath schools are still virtual. So
Sabbath School. Thank you guys. It has been invaluable. You don't
Very
even know how
nice.
many people
We'll
that
have
you
to have you back
We
again.
got to have you back again.
Yeah.
I know you got more stories to tell.
Mhm.
And thank you very much. Thanks,
Hopefully,
viewers,
some of
everybody.
us helped tonight.
And our time is up. So bye, everybody. We'll see you
Thank you.
next week.
Mhm.
see you, everybody.